If you're watching this, you're probably thinking about buying the 2021 M1 equipped iPad Pro. Well, I've had this 12.9-inch version for almost 2 weeks now, and I have thoughts. For context, I've used an iPad mainly as a comics making device for the last few years. So I'll be reviewing this from that perspective. Let me start this video with my conclusions first, and then I'll go into details and my reasoning after. Here we go. If you don't currently have an iPad, or you're using one that's less powerful than the 2018 iPad Pro, then this is a great device for creative work. Feel free to buy it. If your budget is tight and you want to save a few $100s, go for the earlier iPads Pro. Now, if you already have the 2018 iPad Pro or later, I'd say just stick with what you've got. It's not worth the upgrade. Okay, with my conclusion out of the way, let's get into the review. Roll credits. What is up guys? Andrew here and welcome to Comicbooker. All things comics from a creator. Alright, there's a bunch of stuff I want to get into, so let's not waste time. The spec I most want to talk about in this review is RAM, so let's breeze through all the other hardware specs first. If you want to jump around or whatever, check out the time codes in the description. Let's get into the review. The 2021 iPad Pro comes with Apple Pencil 2 support, and it's my favorite drawing stylus experience, bar none. It's smooth, hyper-responsive, and it's so easy and natural to use. Coming from using traditional pens and pencils, you might be surprised by how slick and slippery it is at first, because the tip against the glass doesn't give you the same friction as paper. But get used to it and you'll enjoy what is, in my view, the best digital drawing experience money can buy. One caveat: if you're coming from an older iPad with Apple Pencil support, there is no functional difference between this and that. It's the same great drawing experience across the board. This device ships with a 12 megapixel wide camera, a LiDAR scanner, and a 10 megapixel ultra wide camera. I almost never use the iPad's camera except to scan documents or maybe photograph a physical drawing that I want to color in Procreate. And since most of us have even better cameras in our smartphones, I don't think this spec is all that important. But they're decent cameras if you ever need one. Software-wise, you'll get the same operating system as any of the other iPads Pro, which won't be as versatile or as customizable as Windows or Mac OS, but will run buttery smooth and with some nimble multitasking, allow you to do most regular tasks you can think of doing on a digital device. The big difference between this iPad Pro and all the others is the new mini-LED screen technology, which does a bunch of fancy stuff with local dimming zones to give you higher dynamic contrast. This means that the darks are darker, the whites are whiter, and so on. Practically speaking, I don't feel there's much of a difference between this and the previous LED screen technology, which was already pretty excellent. This screen gets much brighter in direct sunlight, if drawing in direct sunlight is your thing. Otherwise, you'd really have to put them side by side with another iPad Pro to nitpick any difference. One last thing about the screen. There's been talk about blooming issues, but in my experience, this won't affect you unless you're part of an extremely small subset of users who like to use the iPad at max brightness in a pitch black room. A lovely way to sear your eyeballs. Seriously guys, just use it at normal brightness. Okay, now onto the meat of this review. Let's talk RAM. So the iPad I'm reviewing is the 2021 M1 iPad Pro with 1 terabyte of storage. That means it comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Which sounds amazing, until you realize that iPadOS won't let you take advantage of it inside an individual app. Some backstory. When they first announced the M1 iPad Pro, Apple advertised the included RAM for the first time. This excited a lot of people, because in creative apps, more RAM usually equals higher layer limits, bigger art projects, and so on. However, we soon learned from developers that iPadOS caps RAM usage to a maximum of 5 gigabytes for individual apps, regardless of whether you have an iPad with 8 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of RAM. So what does this mean? Well, your creative apps will still be able to run well, but you're not gonna get a ridiculous bump in memory ability that the hardware spec implies. Compared to earlier iPads, this extra RAM will allow you to keep more apps running in the background without them falling out of memory. Which is not a huge concern for me, because I don't mind refreshing an app once in a while. But I don't float a lot of apps in memory, mostly just Procreate, Safari, Photos, and whatever text editing app has my comics script. On the topic of layer limits, there's still a notable practical upgrade. Here's my 2018 iPad Pro next to the 2021 iPad Pro. For this example, I've loaded up the standard digital canvas dimensions that Marvel Comics currently uses for its interior comics pages. As you can see, the 2018 iPad with 4 GB of RAM gives you 42 layers to work with, while the 2021 iPad with 16 gigabytes of RAM gives you 69 layers. That's an extra 27 layers to work with, giving you like a 64% increase in the layers you can use. Now, it's not the 400% increase that the hardware specs imply, but that's still significant. Does that make this worth the extra $400 or $500? You decide. Which brings us to the last bit, which is price. This model with 1 terabyte of storage, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and cellular connectivity costs about $2,000. If you wanted a more conservative spec, the base Wi-Fi only version of this with half the RAM and 1/8 of the storage will run you about $1,100. Throw in an extra $130 for an Apple Pencil because it's an art essential. That's a lot of money. For contrast, you can currently buy a 256 gigabyte Wi-Fi only iPad Pro. Basically the same model I've used for the past 3 years, for less than $800 on Amazon. Maybe even less if you get a refurbished unit elsewhere. I'm bringing this up because I've decided to return this M1 iPad Pro. I mean, it's really nice, but for me, it's just not worth the money. I'd rather save my cash for a more significant upgrade down the line. If budget is an issue, I recommend going for the 2018 version. This is still an amazing machine. I love it and I will continue to abuse it for my art making needs. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say on this year's iPad Pro. If you have questions or you want to add anything to the conversation, hit me up in the comments below. Hope this video was helpful to you. Until next time, peace.